All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Might be a few others joining us as we get going here, but so good morning, everybody. Today, what we're going to do, I'm going to go over some information as it relates to tackling projects related specifically to web development, web design. So I'm going to talk about systems engineering, which kind of relates to the concepts found within web development, kind of project management. Then we'll talk about some business analysis information, and then kind of talk about the way to approach project management as it relates to web development through like strategic planning. So that's kind of what we'll be covering this morning. And then the only assignment for this this week is there's a quiz in Canvas that covers the information that I'll be going over today. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Get all my windows in place here. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about systems engineering. So this is a kind of an area that relates to so most businesses have some sort of a system in place for their business, and kind of how that relates to both the information technology side of things, as well as kind of the product side. All right. So there's basically two types of system engineering. There's the product engineering, which is focused specifically on the product, and the information engineering, which is kind of the backbone of a lot of businesses, their web presence, any other kind of IT related systems that are in place in order for that business to succeed. Okay. So systems engineering, we approach that in kind of a way to produce information systems that support the business by really managing, accessing, and sharing information. Okay, so if you think about website for a business, what does it do? Well, if they're selling something, they need to make sure that website is functional, that people can access the information they need to make a decision to purchase something. Internally, right, we have to be able to make sure that it supports things like any kind of HR related areas. Okay, so it's all about really managing that information. Okay, the ultimate purpose is to support the goals of the enterprise in which it operates. Okay. And so if we look at take a visual approach to this of an information system, if we kind of start at the top part there, there's the business enterprise. Okay. There's some strategic planning that goes in place at that level, and we'll go over that here shortly. But a lot of businesses have multiple business areas. Okay, so if you think about a company, for example, let's just think about Amazon, right? They have a lot of different business areas, right? They have the entertainment side, where they're producing entertainment, TV shows, movies. They have the e-commerce side, right, where they're selling everything, pretty much everything you could probably think of. And they have like the AWS, Amazon Web Services, kind of another business area. So they have all these different business areas. And then if we go down a little bit further and we take a look at those business areas, each of those areas processes, they have different processes and ways that they handle the data. Okay. And then so for those different business processes, Each of those will have kind of their own take on an information system that they have to put in place, right? Because those information systems are going to have different functionalities to support those different processes. And if we go down a step further, there's all the system components that are tied into that information system. And then if we go to the very bottom, that's where we get into the specifics of like developing databases, specific software and hardware that tie into those systems that support everything kind of moving up the pyramid, if you will, there. Okay, does that make sense? So it's kind of a top-down approach. A lot of what we'll be doing this semester and the next semester, we're going to focus on that bottom level, right? How to develop a database and kind of a little bit of the software application side. But really, there's a lot more that's going on within a system. Okay. All right. So we kind of break this down, this information engineering, we kind of break it down into these, what I would say, these 4 stages here. The strategic planning stage, that's where we're looking at the mission of the organization. We're looking at their goals, their objectives. Then we look at the business area analysis. Okay, that's where we're trying to identify the organization's vital areas and their different processes. And then the systems development. Okay, how are we going to design out a system that takes advantage of the information that helps accomplish all of those strategic goals that the business might have. And then the last one there is the database development. Okay, that's where we're looking at building out databases and those different applications within a system that helps support all those other goals. All right. And if we look at these components of a system, okay, there's definitely the hardware components, right? All the server hardware, any kind of other things related to the network that might be under there. So those are all the physical components. Then we have the software side, right? All of the any kind of application that we need to develop for that business in order for them to produce information, manage that information, share that information. Then there's the data. Okay, there's lots of different types of data that we might be working with, but we need to make sure that that data is secure, that it's useful, and it's being used in a way that helps support the goals of the company. Then the processes. These are kind of just the tasks that people within the organization they need to perform in order to tie back into the goals and the strategic plan of that company. Okay. All right, so I'll touch a little bit on product engineering. This is really just kind of the area of systems engineering where the focus is around a certain product that's being built. Okay. We look at this chart here. We start up there with the top. So that's the complete product. So a product that's been produced and completed. And so it's really about the services and the capabilities that product brings. And then if we move down in the chart there, there's the 2 sides. There's hardware components, software components that could be tied into there. That's part of the process, processing the requirements. And when we look at specifically at the software components, there's data, there's these different processes, there's behaviors that we're looking at. This is part of the system design, okay? And then these different system components are going to have a lot of other kind of individual components that are tied into them that help make those systems work. And again, that all kind of ties back to the top level where we look at the services and capabilities of a specific product. Okay, so kind of everything has its place and it's all important if you're looking at the larger scheme of the product. Okay, so the stages of product engineering, there's the system analysis, process of building a complete model. So a lot of times we need to, we're going to take a lot of time and kind of planning, figuring out what all the requirements are of that system. That's an important step. And then the systems design, that's the actual process of building out that model and describing all of those physical components that are tied to the system. Okay. So important thing to remember, ultimately an information system and like the databases that are tied into it, they need to support the mission, the goals, and the objectives of that business enterprise. Okay. Yeah, I think that's the last slide. So Dr. Hoekman, I know you have kind of some experience with this with one of your previous jobs with the ALCO. Is there anything else you want to maybe add to kind of the importance of the business model and how that ties into what web developers do and network engineers?
So yeah, I think that last piece of everything kind of revolves around the business aspect. We support the business goals and ultimately make money. That's ultimately what every business wants to make sure happens, is that they're profitable, make money, and can be like a long lifespan, longevity. I think one of the things to keep in mind as you're thinking about these systems is all the different areas that you're going to have to interact with or work with. When we put you in teams, and to work in teams or small groups, that's a very common way of being in business and working towards those common goals, is to think about, in a business setting, all the areas that you're going to have to work with. So I really had no idea until I got going. I was going to have to work with real estate because they were the ones who were securing the buildings and the locations and the cities. I was going to have to work with like the people who lay out the floor and where they're placing shelving and racks and all of that stuff, because all of that mattered in where we put wireless access points and where our server room was going to go and where all the networking equipment was going to be. I had to work with the transportation department. When was the equipment being shipped out? When were all of the pieces and parts being put into the store itself? On site, I was working with general managers, general contractors. So the general manager of the store and the general contractor for the building company. And they were actually setting up equipment for me. People who are just in charge of exactly what we're talking about, right? The overall system of building. They were in charge of that, but they had to set up a lot of my equipment because there was nothing else on site. And we had to have certain pieces in place before all the rest of it could go down. So the leveling and how much you actually work with other departments and other people. So I know it's hard sometimes to want to be in that group environment and work in those small groups or larger groups. But it is something that you're going to have to do when you think about a business system and what it takes for everybody to pull their end of the job and be successful for the company. So there's a lot to it.
Yeah, that's a kind of a perfect segue into my next section here. So let me share screen again. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the strategic planning process. Okay. So if we're kind of looking back at the information engineering stages, right? That previous slide, there's these different areas. So kind of the nitty gritty, right? Where you start to develop the database. That's an important stage, but the first stage we really need to pay attention to and really put some time into when we're working with a client or within an organization, as a web developer, web designer, is that strategic planning phase. Okay. So part of this phase is to identify an organization's mission, identify what their goals are as an organization, and then talk about the objectives. Okay. So a mission, so like a mission statement, that's really about the overall purpose of the organization. So that could include, who their customers are, what their products are, what services do they provide, what value do they add, and then the goals are kind of the long-term statements of direction of the company. Okay, so usually a mission statement is going to be pretty stable. Goals might change periodically because these again are kind of long-term goals. But then the objectives, these are kind of more of your shorter term quantitative actions that you have to think about that help achieve those goals. Okay. So if we look at it in kind of visual way here, we have the mission, which is the overall mission of the organization. Okay. Then you might have a few goals. Usually there's not a whole lot of those goals because usually an organization will try to narrow those down to make sure that they're strategic goals and helping achieve that mission. But then within each goal, you're probably going to have multiple objectives that you have to identify. And again, the key point there with those objectives is that they're quantitative, okay, that you can measure them to see if you're making progress towards that goal. All right. So, if we're looking at that chart, the areas on the right, those are more specific. They need to be measurable. And then the area, if we take a look here, as we move from right to left, each of those objectives have to support the goal to achieve that goal. And then each of those goals have to help support the mission of an organization. All right. So here's an example. So this organization, their mission is to provide the highest possible quality of wireless communication devices at an affordable price. Okay, so that's kind of their mission. So what are their goals? The first one would be to reduce the manufacturing costs of the phones. And if we look at the objectives to help support that goal, one of them could be gain a 10% price reduction from suppliers. Another objective might be redesign certain areas or certain pieces of that phone to reduce assembly costs by 20%. Okay, another goal might be maintain high quality as in regard to the manufacturing standards, and an objective to help achieve that goal, decrease the number of defects by 20%, right? So the thing you'll notice is those objectives, they have some quantitative pieces to them, right? 10% price reduction, 20% reduction in assembly costs, 20% reduction in defects. So those are things that, the company, the organization can actually track, and those will help them identify whether those goals are being met, which in the long run then helps achieve that mission, right? So another one, So mission might be to improve web exposure to potential customers. Okay, so that could be the mission of some kind of a website, web company. One goal by Google Ads, linking to different landing pages. Okay, an objective for that goal, increase the number of landing page hits by 10. Okay, so again, they can measure that through analytics. Another goal, improve the landing pages, improve the design, the content, some objectives. Again, these are quantitative, increase the number of inquiries by 40%. So that's something that they can track and be able to respond to those inquiries within 24 hours. Okay, so there would be a system in place to track those responses. All right. So again, things to remember here, the overarching context of your information system, it's really about the strategic plan of that organization. Okay, so the mission, the goals, the objectives. So a lot of times, and I've done this just from experience, when I first started doing freelance web design, I didn't really spend a lot of time communicating with the client, understanding their business, understanding what their mission, their goals were. I kind of just jumped right into the design part and the coding and the development part of it, which can be kind of a negative down the road, because then if you're not aware of what their specific goals are, sometimes the client might not communicate that to you, just off, it's because a lot of times that's something that's very familiar to them, and they might not think, to share that information. But then when you put the website together and design it and develop everything, it might not really tie back to certain goals that they have. And then you have to get into the redesign phase or, revision phase, which, can frustrate the client. They're like, well, why didn't you, design this landing page, to take inquiries? Maybe I forgot to put a form on there or something. So anyway, it's important to communicate all of this with the client up front, understand their strategy for their business and their company, understand any kind of goals that they might have, because that's going to help you in the long run, as you're developing a system for them that's going to work for what they need. Okay. All right. Anything else you'd like to add, Annie? No. Okay. All right. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the last section here. All right, we're going to get into the business analysis area. All right. So this is that kind of second stage of information engineering. So usually you'll meet with a client, kind of understand what their strategic goals are, what the mission is of their company, hopefully identify some of those objectives to help meet those goals. But another stage is to really identify how that business is set up, analyze their different areas within the business. So if we look at what, just the basic meaning of analysis, it's to take something, kind of break it into the specific parts to kind of find out what those functions are. Another thing we're going to be talking about is modeling. That means to describe something in a way that it produces a model that can be used to help build out the final product. And then so business analysis and modeling, it's really about seeking to describe what an organization's business areas are, and then what those business areas do, okay, the activities. So a business area, it's a high-level division that's vital to the operation. Okay, so for example, What I got here, sales for a retail store, insurance processing for doctor's office, circulation desk for library, and so on. Okay, so they're like different components or different areas within that overall organization that help that organization function. So examples of these processes, you know, if we just look at some basic things here, right, like a grocery store checking out customers, restocking shelves, selling items for a .com e-commerce retailer, shipping those items, taking an order at a restaurant. Okay, so these are all processes, individual processes of a larger organization, a larger business. And so when we model this, we want to basically kind of figure out all these different areas and how they relate to the overall business. And we want to kind of show these different processes within the business and how they kind of tie back to, you know, all the other areas. Okay, so there's kind of a certain way this is going to look similar to like you know, like a sitemap that you might have seen for web design, web development. And so it's really basically another term you might hear is like organizational chart. Okay, so like K-State, we have quite a few organizational charts within the organization, but those charts, what they do is they just kind of help describe and visually show how all of those different processes tie into the overall business or organization. So this example here, doctor's office, right? There's all these different pieces to the doctor's office, patient records, accounting, billing, scheduling. Okay, so for example, like patient records, updating those records with notes, billing and insurance. They take care of sending insurance records to the insurance companies. So all of these different business processes help out the overall organization. If you look at a library, kind of same thing, right? We got different areas of a library, fundraising, development, human resources, operations. Within the operations, there's areas like acquisition, reference, circulation. And then if you kind of break that down further, for example, circulation, keeping track of items that are checked out, returned, putting books back on the shelf. So again, we're just kind of modeling out how this organization works and the different areas within it. Okay, we look at a .com retailer, right, like Amazon. There's the sales part of it, where we have to process the orders, prepare shipping documents. There's the accounting side, keeping track of everything that's been sold, shipping, okay, packing and sending out the goods that people buy, and then the information system area, where this is your people and systems that keep everything running and going. Okay, and so these processes, there's if we take a look at the kind of the order, there's usually a trigger event. So in this example, would be for like, you know, Amazon or something like that. The customer clicks checkout, you know, they want to buy some things, they got them in their cart, they click checkout, displays what the items are on there. They put in their shipping information, that updates the order in the system. Then they accept the payment information, does another update, and then they submit the order, generates a receipt, shipping list, gives them an invoice, and then that order is complete. Okay, so these are the types of things we have to think about when we, you know, are working with a business, a company. Specifically, you know, we're talking about web development. We really need to understand all their processes from like start to finish. Okay, so it's really vital that we communicate well with a client, with a business, to understand how their operations work, because that's going to affect, you know, what we do as far as how many databases do we need to develop, what information is going to be in those databases, how do those different databases connect to each other and work with each other. All right. It's important to, really think about that overall organization of, how the business is set up, because something that we create for one business process might affect another one. Okay, so that's all just good information to have and to understand in order to ultimately provide a good product for that company. Okay, so stop sharing here. So like next semester, when you all are taking the web development project class, this is the type of stuff we need to remember, when we first meet with the client, whoever that is. So you guys will work with an actual client on a website. And so these are the type of things that we need to communicate and, really have a good dialogue with the client and the customer right up front. Understand what their business goals are, what the mission of their organization is, and then to really talk about those objectives, and then understand the different parts of their operation. Okay, so if I try and think of an example here, so a couple of years ago we did a web project for the Salina Regional Hospital. They have a part of the hospital it's kind of like the Ronald McDonald House, where families and people, friends they have somebody that's in the hospital, maybe kind of is going to be there for a little long term, but they're this part of the hospital, they offer a place for family and friends to stay while their loved one is in the hospital. So they came to us. They wanted a web system to basically kind of be like a booking system, where those people could go online, see if there are rooms available, be able to book those rooms, and then set up any. It's free service, but they wanted to have the option if people wanted to donate to the organization, the foundation, they could donate some money. So we worked on building out that system, but there was a lot of other things involved as we got into the project, like they needed to be able to produce reports for the hospital foundation, the fundraising arm of the hospital, to give them reports. It needed to be tied into we had to work with the information, the IT team within the hospital to make sure that the system would work within their servers. And so there's all these different areas that, as you get into a project, you don't really think about at the beginning. But if you kind of follow these steps that we talked about today, it's going to really help you figure out, the best way to approach a project when you're going through that planning phase. Okay. All right, does that make sense? Okay, any questions on anything we went over today? Anything you want to add, Annie?
I'd say this last part, I think the one thing that I think all of us probably tend to just gravitate towards is we have an idea in our minds of what the project should be, because obviously they've asked us and we're sort of the experts in it. But I think this is the stage where you really have to ask a lot of questions, and you really need to be in a position to listen, to understand. And I hope that makes sense. Like, we can listen, but we're listening to the pieces and parts of what we want to hear that we think is important for what our job is, and not listening to try to understand what maybe the issues are, what the concerns might be, what, all the small details of that is. So if there is something that isn't clear, you need to ask. If there's something that you think of as you're hearing them and you're hearing what they're talking about and it spurs something, that's a time to ask. This is very much informational gathering and you trying to really learn as much as you possibly can about the customer, the business, the wants, the needs, and not necessarily what it is you think that should be happening. And I know that's hard sometimes because we want to just jump in and be like, we have the answer, we have the solution, this is what I think. Because Michael's right, we come in with some preconceived notions of what it is that we think should be done because we're the experts and they're calling us to do this. But that can really have detrimental effects as you get going down into the project, because if you aren't listening and you aren't asking questions and you aren't understanding up front, you may miss something down the road. And ultimately that leads to either a redesign, or longer than what you told them it was going to be, like longer delivery, because now you're going back and starting over, or changing something. So really think about this process is, I really need to listen and hear and learn and ask questions and get as much information and detail as I can before I actually try to lay out the plan.
Yeah. Sometimes, and there's a thing called project kind of a scope creep, where if you don't put the time into asking those questions up front and gathering all that information, the scope of the project can kind of creep on you, which it's really nobody's fault. The client has one thing in mind, and then you're putting out what you think they need to, what they need to have, but then as the client looks at it and gets a better feel for it, they're like, oh well, wait, we need to add this and this and this, and so then just the overall scope of the project will creep. Then you're missing deadlines, and it's taken twice as long as you had told the client it would take. So but if you put the time in up front to ask all those questions, understand their goals, then it'll be a lot smoother process.
And I know a lot of you, I mean, I kind of had this envision, what I expected like industry to be like also. And we think that we're going to spend the majority of our time doing whatever we thought we would be doing in life, like whatever our job would be. So in this particular instance, what Michael's talking about, you think, oh, I'm going to spend the majority of my time creating backgrounds and designing pages and putting color and fonts, and I'm going to spend all my time like that. This is what I want to do, and it is. But I know it's hard sometimes for students to understand, why do I need to take, XBOS 1? Why do I need to learn to write? Why do I have to be good at public speaking? Like, why do schools require us to take speech classes? This right here, I can't tell you how many times I had to prepare presentations in something that we absolutely needed to have in our department, and I had to speak in a language that our chief financial officer or CFO understood, which was numbers, right? They understand bottom dollar, but there's so much more. Why do I need to upgrade 4 servers? Why do I need to spend $200,000 upgrading 4 servers? All of that is presentation, this information gathering stage, this really understanding customers, writing. We spend a lot of time doing these things that you see in other classes. So yes, absolutely. We want you to have all these design skills, and we want you to have all of this stuff that make you successful, but all of these other classes that support all of that play a role in ultimately how successful you're going to be in your job also. So as you're thinking about assignments in XPOS 1 or XPOS 2 or whatever the next writing class is, or, you know, doing a group project and having to prepare a report or a presentation, I spent most of my time presenting to C-level folks, and I worked in the hospital. I spent a lot of my time doing that. I needed things. I needed things, and I had to be able to portray that message. But I also had to hear from them and understand their point of view also, which CFOs, it's always bottom dollar.
Yeah.
Just as they're money people. That's what they do.
Yeah. So that's why it's important for all those other, that's why we always seem to harp on you guys as far as communicating and you know, writing and all that. So it is important. So all right. So that's all I got today. What I want you to do, so there's a quiz that you'll need to take this week. It's based on the information that I presented today. The slides are in Canvas for you to review and keep. The quiz just based off of those. So want you to do that. And then next week we'll be back in person for those of you on campus. And I think what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to combine a couple modules. So we'll talk about more technical stuff next week as far as like the database management process. And then we'll also cover something called use cases. So we'll do that next week. And then I think we have Dr. Hoekman and I were talking about some new topics that we might bring. So areas like cybersecurity and some of that stuff we might bring here in the next a couple weeks or so. So just want you to know that the layout of the course might change a little bit as far as what you see in the modules there in Canvas. All right. Okay. Any questions on anything? All right. Well, have a good weekend. If you got questions on anything we went over today, or you know, want to talk further on anything, just reach out, email. If not, we'll see everybody next week again in person for those on campus. Zoom folks, we'll see you. We will see you on Zoom. I got a question here. Open note. Yeah, it's open note. Yeah, feel free to use those slides. Yeah, just want you to we put a quiz in there just so to kind of help retain that information, right? So the more you see it, the more you'll retain it in the future. Okay. All right. Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye, everyone. Go
Bye.
Cats.
Yep.